Hey everyone, it's Alicia. Welcome to another episode of Tears at the Table. I'm really excited because we have Morgan Busse on here, who is an author that specializes in Christian fantasy fiction. I'm really excited because she is one of two original Christian fantasy fiction authors that I found. So, welcome, Morgan, and tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. So it's really funny, but whenever someone's like, "Oh, tell me about yourself," all of a sudden I'm like, "Who am I? What is my name?" It's like, what do I say? So I'm married to a pastor. So we've been married for 25 years, which is really hard to believe for us. I like to say I'm a mom, and I still am a mom, but I just entered my empty nesting a couple weeks ago because my youngest two, which are twins, just graduated from high school and they're heading off onto their own pathways. So I'm learning to have a new, different kind of life. But it does help. My husband and I love rescues, and we currently have three dogs and two cats. So they definitely keep me busy as well. And then I was telling you just before we came on that I'm in the midst of a move. God's always moving us. And this time we are moving to Texas. So I have everything packed up and just waiting for the house to sell. And then we're going on our next adventure. I guess a few other things besides my family. Obviously, I love reading. I'm a writer. I also love games, and I love both board games and I also love video games. I've played video games for many years. It's one way I've bonded with my children. And also, I worked in youth ministry for many years, and I found it was a way I could connect with young people. And I just love it. My favorite exercises I love either hiking, biking, or walking. I love just being out in nature. So there you go.
So, random rapid fire questions here. What is your favorite video game and your favorite board game?
Oh boy. So favorite video game is probably going to be a toss up between Skyrim and Oblivion. And when Oblivion dropped their remastered a month or two ago, I'm like salivating. And I have a book deadline right now, August 1st. And as soon as my book's turned in, I have not allowed myself to play. That's going to be my decompression. I wrote three books. I'm done with this book deadline. And I am just going, and plus done with this move. God, please let us be done with this move. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to play my favorite video game again. So I'm excited to see what they've done and all the graphics and stuff like that. So yeah.
I love that. And I love that you described how an author's life consists of working until you hit that deadline. It's not the
Oh, yeah.
same as any other job.
Yep, yep. And you can't, I know some people like to joke about, whoosh, there goes the sun of the deadline going by, but trust me, your publisher doesn't like that. Your readers don't like that. You don't like yourself when you do that. So I work really, really hard to meet those deadlines just so that I'm a good steward of my time and the books I have and a good author for my publisher. So, yep.
Awesome work ethic there. Very aligned with scripture.
Oh,
Um,
yes.
Tell us a little bit, like you said you're a pastor's wife, but what was your own journey with Jesus from the beginning?
Oh, well, you have to understand I'm 45 now, so that's many years to cover. So I grew up in a family that was religious. We went to church every Sunday and stuff. If you had me in your Sunday school class, I was the little girl who knew all the Bible verses and stuff like that. However, home was very difficult. My parents were in the process of for many years getting together, separating, getting together, separating until they finally got a divorce, which was difficult. And then also during that time, my grandmother passed away from lung cancer. And she was the only grandparent I really knew at that point. And it was really devastating to watch one grandparent I knew to die, honestly, which is a horrific way to die. And so those were two events that kind of turned me away from God for a while because honestly, my question was if God was loving, why did he allow such awful things to happen? In fact, I remember one time walking around the corner of my house and I just basically told God, I'm not interested in you, get out of my life, because there was never a point where I didn't believe there wasn't a God. He's always been around me. It was just, I was so hurt as a young person with all that stuff. And thank God he said, well, you're coming this way. Basically, that happened in my middle school years. By that point, my parents were divorced. My mom was a single mom. And I'm the oldest. I always ended up babysitting my brothers and sisters. And we went to a vacation Bible school one night, and I'm sitting in the back. I'm that sullen teenager. I don't want to be there. And the guy only shared the gospel. I can't tell you what he said, other than I remember he was talking about Jesus dying on the cross. And I could have told the whole story because I had many, many years of really good church Sunday school, amazing Sunday school teachers. And I don't know, for some reason that night, God got a hold of me. I don't remember any prayer I prayed. I don't remember anything. I just remember going home that night. And honestly, at that point in my life, we were kind of between homes because my mom had just graduated from college. She was trying to find a job. We couldn't live on the college campus anymore. And so it was a pretty rough summer for my family. And so we were technically living with my aunt. And so I remember going home that night and I had such peace and such joy that I never experienced in my life. And that's the reason I know that's the moment God got a hold of me, because I radically changed. I just changed from that moment on. I wanted to know more about him. I followed him. My mom saw the change. Other people in my life saw the change. They're like, you're very different now. So that's how I came to know Christ. And then, like I said, there's been a whole journey, because that's kind of how it is. We don't stop when we come to know Christ. It's now we're walking with him, and we're walking through mountains, and we're walking through valleys, and we're walking through darkness, and we're walking through times of light. And I think a lot of that comes up in my stories with each journey, because all of us are taking different journeys. And as we take those journeys, we grow closer and closer to Christ through everything we go through. So that's how it started.
I love that you shared that and you talked about always knowing God was there, but how your relationship with him evolved and how you heard the gospel at the right point, even though you'd heard it before in your life, and it really transformed you. I like how you talked about hurt being part of that story before. For myself, I grew up in ministry as a pastor's kid, and we had, unfortunately, very bad pastors.
Mm,
And
that's
for
hard.
it's very hard, especially as a kid. And for me, I remember saying it. People are like, "You can't say that." I would be like, "Well, I what I would say about God, it was I hated him," and they're
Mhm.
like, "You can't say that." And I would always say, "Better to hate someone than completely be unaware of their existence and not even care." And it's like you said, it was understanding what I saw of God and how he was portrayed. Well, if I died, I would go see him, and how would that be better than hell? Which sounds horrible, but unfortunately, we have the wrong representation sometime of who God is. Thankfully, there were years of amazing people that came into my life, like you said, evolving, growing, that really
Yeah.
shaped and told me, hey, God is not that, and nor are his people. You just have to continue building, growing, and seeing where God takes you.
Yep. And if I might add, and God can handle all the emotions we have at the moment, because he understands that we're human beings and we have those emotions. The anger sometimes, even the hatred sometimes, because life really hurts. And he's big enough to handle that. And that was something I had to come to realize. And when I did, I realized I could take everything to him.
Yeah. I love that, and that's exactly what I discovered over the years. And I want to shift a little bit with your journey with writing and stuff. Like for me as a kid, one of my escapes was books,
Mhm.
and a spot in that was fantasy fiction. But it was hard because there was C.S. Lewis and there was Tolkien, and then it was like, well, what happened since then? And there has been a wave that I truly believe you were one of the earlier people in of really creating intentional and solid fantasy fiction that draws people in. Was that something you imagined yourself doing? Did you fall into it?
No, it's so funny when people are like, "Oh, did you always want to be a writer?" And I'm like, "Nope, nope." I loved reading. And honestly, when I was 6, I wanted to be a unicorn. So actually, my true loves in school were science. I am such a science nerd. I'm the biggest science nerd ever. But I always loved to read. And one thing also, looking back on my life now, was I was always playing make believe. I would get my brother and sisters together and we're like, okay, let's pretend that, blah, blah, blah. And I'd come up with the whole world
Yeah.
and the scenario and what's going to happen and stuff. And then we'd play it for days on end, this scenario I'd come up with. And I didn't realize at that point, God was teaching me how to build worlds, how to use my imagination. I did grow up in the dichotomy where Like I said, my parents were divorced. On the one hand, my mom was very conservative, fantasy was evil. On the other side was my dad, who was a total nerd before it was really cool to be nerd. And so growing up, I'm like, oh, which one's right? Is it wrong to want to be, well, I can't be a unicorn, but was it wrong to like unicorns? Was it wrong to imagine a world where there was magic? But am I dishonoring God by that? And that honestly is part of the journey of me becoming a writer, because when I became an adult, and honestly, it was Harry Potter. At that point, my family was, my husband was a youth pastor, and we had so many people asking us, is Harry Potter bad? What does the Bible say about it? And my husband and I are like, we want to figure this out for ourselves. So we went on our own journey. And for me, Harry Potter was magic that is just genetic. People are born with it. Granted, they live in this world, and I feel a little more comfortable putting that magic in another world. But I realized that there was ways to build worlds where people could have abilities and gifts. And then as I began to look at stories, that really it came down to a choice. And that's what it is in the real world. We're all giving with different abilities, gifts, whether that's you're born with wealth or you're born with smarts, you're born with beauty, you're born with connections, with abilities. Everyone, it doesn't matter how you started out. Everyone is given that, and it's how the choices that we make. And that's again something that probably always shows up in my books is, what do you do with what you've been given? You know, and like you said, there was just C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, because I really started, okay, now that I kind of made peace with myself about fantasy, I was a voracious reader. But one thing is, I really became tired of running into scenarios that I didn't want to read about in books. You know what I mean? I wanted books that would point me towards God and strengthen my relationship with God. So this was back in 2024. And I went into a Christian bookstore and I said, oh, where's your guys' science fiction fantasy section? And I remember the lady gave me the weirdest look, and she's like, well, we have Frank Peretti. And there was one book. And at that point, I didn't realize this, because 2 years later, I would go to a writing conference and realize why there was no Christian science fiction fantasy other than C.S. Lewis and Tolkien and maybe one or two others, because no publisher would publish them. And at that point, there wasn't Amazon. There wasn't a way for people to publish their own books. If you publish your own books, you put them in your garage and you tried to sell them on your own. It was very, very hard. And so that's part of the reason there was no more modern science fiction and fantasy. But I that didn't stop me from writing. I had this story inside of me. Honestly, my first story was Daughter of Light, and it was my first published book. And I went to that writing conference, felt kind of depressed, but I'm like, I'm going to still write this. And about 2 years later, I read a blog about a guy who was going to start an independent publishing company just for Christian science fiction fantasy. And I remember sitting at the table reading that blog off my laptop, and I looked at my husband and I said, my book might have a home someday. And that was March Your Lord Press. And that's exactly where my first series was published for. And then you know the history. Eventually, March Your Lord Press was bought by Enclave, which is the Enclave that you know of today, who has really, really helped grow this genre. Plus, we've taken a lot of the stigma out of that science fiction fantasy is evil. I teach classes on world building, and I love it when I have people who are just curious at writing conferences who don't write science fiction fantasy, but they'll come to my class because I explain to them how we do it and the questions we ask so that we can remain theologically sound, but use our imagination. You know, something that people don't think about.
You know what? You answered it very well, and I appreciate that you really address the topic of the controversy around it, especially with magic. And for
Mhm.
me, like whether or not it was appropriate could be up for debate. My parents were listening to audio tapes of Hangman's Curse when I was like 7 years old in the car with me. And I grew up in this world where demons existed, and I actually have my master's in social work, and I existed in a world where I was at mental health complexes and people were telling me things like, yes, my wife came to me when the archangel Michael slid her down a rainbow into my arms, and they legitimately believe these things. And
Yeah.
so I'm living in the very real world where people are talking about things that sound straight out of science fiction, and I began my own journey, like you said, with Harry Potter. And I became obsessed with that world. But all the authors I was finding were ones my teenage girls in a residential home were recommending. And I'd open them and I would be like, I don't want them to read this. This has some very sketchy morals going on at this point
Yep.
and very
Yeah.
intense sex scenes, actually. And I don't want a teenage girl to read that. And I was like, I want to see something different and something that says magic is real. It's
Mhm.
owned by God, but we have said, oh no, let's stay away from that because it's been portrayed in only a way where the devil gets the glory, essentially. But there's this whole world when you jump into spiritual gifts or in the Bible, people get healed, miracles happen, and that's through God. There's even prophecy in the Bible, which is telling the future under God's domain. So I
Mhm.
think it's
Yep.
taking that back, and that's what you do with your writing is you take that back and say, this was all God's first, and we
Mhm.
misconstrued it.
I'm reading a book that comes out July 1st that basically talks about this whole thing where theology, God, and fantasy come together. And I just am really thankful for the deep research she's done on a lot of this. I think just given what you're saying, you would really resonate with what she wrote about.
I'm definitely gonna check out that book because that's been something I've delved more and more into. And
Mhm.
it provides hope. This is going into TV series things, which I will warn audiences is not for everyone. But like Smallville is one of my obsessions. And I love the supernatural aspect, but I also love that it's always about bringing hope. You see
Mhm.
some incredibly dark things that would scare some people, which is why I don't recommend it for everyone. But every time there's this thread of hope that says, but look, he's coming to save the day. And we
Oh, I
can do that.
love Smallville. That was one of my husband and my TV shows that, yeah, it started back when we were in seminary, so that was a long time ago.
I get that. This is my third round through it. So um, I think it's things like that. It's all about perspective and shifting your perspective. And I always tell people we live in a victim mentality world, just in general. And it's saying we're actually the victors. We're always the victors in the story when we have Christ.
Mhm.
And
Yep.
we can take back any world, any
Mhm.
genre, anything for God's glory. We just have to believe we can and be willing, like you said, you're like, even if there's not a market, I'm going to put myself out there and I'm going to write it and I'm going to wait for that opportunity. And what we have now is so many people. Like, I encourage people to check out Enclave. I've been following them and it's high quality. It's not.
It's not that cheesy fiction that people think Christian fiction will be, and they're not afraid to address dark things. And that's what I want to write about, but I want to show that there's hope. So on the one hand, because life hurts and there's a lot of hard things that happen, but I also want to show there's hope.
I agree, and I think you do that very well.
Thank you.
I feel like we don't want to go through the entire interview without mentioning you have a new series coming out. Can you tell us a little bit about those threads of hope in your
Oh
series?
my word. So yeah, this new series is a Viking fantasy. I've always wanted to write a Viking fantasy. Plus it has ties with my very first series, which is called the Follower of the Word series. So my new series actually takes place in the same world 400 years before. When I was writing Daughter of Light, I mentioned something called the Nordic Wars. And I remember when I wrote that years ago and I thought, that'd be interesting to visit and see what that really was that changed the world. Well, that's what this series is about. It follows a young woman who is clanless in a world where clan means everything, but she's given an opportunity to participate in a trial to elevate who she is. So it's a really complex story. That's kind of what I go for. So, on the one hand, you have this warrior Viking woman who I really wanted to portray what a real fighting woman would be like. And one thing she talks about is what her hands were made for. And her adopted mother is a midwife, and she tries to train Bridget in being midwife. And for reasons that I don't want to give away spoilers, Bridget cannot, she basically realizes I do not have the hands of a healer. And it's through many things she realizes I have the hands of a fighter. And I think sometimes we as women, we struggle with who am I if I don't fit the normal, what we see as women should be, or maybe men should be, or whatever. And so through the book, I wanted to show her journey of learning who God had made her. And this is through the whole series. And then so she fights for the North. Well, then I have the South, and I have a young man who is part of the supernatural race that I have in this series. But the problem is he doesn't have access to the power that his race has been given because he's been hurt very badly by humanity. He watched horrifying things happen to his family, and he just doesn't want anything to do with humans, other than there is a spark. There's a small spark in him that knows he needs to heal. And so he holds on to that, and he goes and finds his old mentor, and he starts his journey of healing, which I love because today I'm writing book 3 right now. I'm on the last fifth chapter. I'm on chapter 39 of the book. I go back to his journey in that chapter today that I was writing, the full circle of how, because at the time I was writing, his name's Caden, writing Caden's journey, his journey became my journey of hurt from the church. Yeah, I'm a pastor's wife, and I have seen the dark sides of the church, and my husband and I, my family, have been treated horribly sometimes by other pastors, by other leaders, and by the church. And how do you keep serving the people God's asked you to serve when you've been hurt? That's honestly his question. How do I serve humanity when humanity has hurt me and my family so much? And so I love the journey he's been through. I love the journey that Bridget has went through, overcoming her insecurities, her fears, and figuring out who she is and who God has made her. It's just, I love this series. I would dare say that this third book that I can't give the title of because they don't let me do that is probably one of the best books I've ever written. And I don't say that lightly because I think Ravenwood's been a great series. All my books have been great, but I would dare say that this book that I'm working on right now is probably one of my best. So,
I appreciate you sharing that. And this has been my favorite series. I should clarify, I've read the first and have the second one, but it has been my favorite for that reason of that identity journey for the both of them, of seeing them come through and my own journey, like you said, growing up in a pastor's family, you're going to encounter hurt. And when you're uniquely called, especially as a pastor's wife in the ministry, you'll be hurt repeatedly and then asked to serve the people that are hurting you.
yep.
And I love that you brought that element in. And once again, that thread of hope of we can do it because it's through Christ and not through us. And he brings that hope and he brings that journey. And
Mm-hmm.
what a cool way to tell it, of course, in your world that in my head is like in Alaska with all the
Mm-hmm.
northern lights and stuff.
Go read it. Whoever's listening to this, it's a great series.
It is.
But the third book doesn't come out till 2026. I apologize.
Oh, don't worry. I felt that way about the first one because it was quite a bit of a wait for the next for this one.
Yeah, yeah. It takes me a while to write book. I always try to make sure they're at least a year.
Yeah.
And this sounds really well, it should make encourage you as a reader. I always make sure I have enough notes that if God takes me home, someone else can finish the series so y'all can know how that story ends.
I appreciate that and I
Oh yeah.
appreciate you're like actually spacing that out because that gives room for margin and the rest of your life to live it and do other things. I do want to shift into our final moments here and ask. I have a final question of what would you say to the young woman who is considering being a writer or sharing her story, especially in the fantasy fiction world?
Oh boy. So it's changed a lot over the last however many years I've been writing. It's been almost 20. Wow. So the big some things have changed, some things haven't. One of the things that has not changed is being a writer is kind of like being a pianist. They learn how to play the piano, yes, and you will learn how to be a writer. You go to conferences, you learn how to plot, you learn how to build the characters, you learn all of that. But what makes you a better writer at the end of the day is you practice all the time. I had one of my mentors once tell me you have to write 1,000,000 words before you finally start writing something worth reading. Now, is that really true of everyone? There's those really amazing, unique people that can pull something out of their head and it's just gorgeous from day one. That's not the majority of us. It's practice, is practice, is practice. So even though Daughter of Light was the first book I wrote and the first book I published, I probably rewrote it 3 to 5 times as I was learning the skills to be a writer. And then it went through 2 or 3 different editing processes. But through that, I learned really how to be a writer. And I practiced how to write description, how to thread plots, how to introduce characters, how to have them journey 100 miles and not make it sound boring. I mean, it sounds weird, but those are the little tricks you start learning as a writer. So practice and enjoy it. It shouldn't be, I mean, it'll be a chore eventually, especially if you have a deadline because you kind of got to get your word count in. But if you don't love the story, you're not going to want to go through those 3 to 5 rewrites and all those edits. Love, love, love the story. Fall in love with your characters. Fall in love with your world. And then as far as the learning part, always there's the conferences that you can go to. There's some really great books out there. You can get a degree and stuff in creative writing, but you don't really have to spend all that money. It's really just about there's a lot of I'm self-taught. A lot of books. Go to the conferences. I would say you learn a whole lot more than you do at a college, and practice, practice, practice. And then I hate to say this, it's still a starving artist kind of job. So anytime I hear people that want to be a writer, I say find a job that pays the bills and gives you the time to be a writer. For example, my oldest daughter wants to be a writer too, and she's got a great young adult voice. I love it. She's also going to be a librarian because that would give her the time to write and also pay the bills. So yeah, it's practical advice, but it helps to eat to write.
I appreciate your advice with that because I run this ministry, Tirza, which is very writer space. And someone told me that exact same advice. They were like, you have an amazing career. You're really good at what you do. Don't give that up because it pays the bills and keep writing. And maybe you're the one in a million that makes tons of money and never has to work again. But maybe if you truly love it, it's what you do in addition to working.
You're a writer if you go a while and it you have to write. You have to. It feels like it builds up inside of you. There'll be times when I'm burned out. I'm like, I don't want to ever write again. And then give it a couple of weeks and I'm like, oh man, my mind's already coming up with ideas and I got to write these ideas down. And so it kind of gets a hold of you and you doesn't let go.
It does. And I will say I agree too on the practice part because we've been running this ministry Tirza now for about 14 years. And so people look at it sometimes and they're like, oh, you have a podcast, you have this, you have that. And I'm like, that is 14 years of more failures than you will ever count
Oh, yes.
and of obscurity that you will never know about.
Mm,
And it was being willing to put yourself out there and fail the million times and take down articles because you're like, wow, I could have written that so much better. And then, like
yes.
you said, with Ravenwood, writing it like a million times.
Oh, yes.
I want to say thank you for coming on, and you did such a great job. I really appreciate you explaining the controversies around magic,
Mhm.
especially for the church. You did that so delicately and such a good way of addressing that topic. I really appreciate it. So thank you for that.
Of course. Thank you for inviting me. And my name is my website, www.morganlbusse.com. I'm wherever books are sold, and I'm on Facebook and Instagram, but I'm more on Instagram. So there you go.
Make sure you check out her new book.
Thank you guys.